Okay, everyone, it's noon. Wanted to welcome you all. So today's seminar, we're going to talk about effective photo sharing and photography for business. And your presenters today are going to be Troy Hayes, our creative director. I'm Bryan Del Monte. I'm going to quickly go through just a few ground rules before we get started. So seriously, we're going to give you our best thoughts and ideas today, but understand we're not making warranties or guarantees about anything in terms of how it's going to unfold or how much money you might make or anything like that. So we were joking about the various types of disclaimers that we see, so before conducting an exercise regimen, consult your doctor. We're professionals. Don't try this at home. But seriously, we're here to just give you our best thoughts and ideas. It's not gospel. We're not promising anything in terms of outcome. That said, this isn't our first rodeo either. So let me talk a little bit about who we are, and we'll go from there. So the first part of the presentation is going to be done by Troy Hayes, and there's Troy, actually right there.
Hello.
30 years in advertising.
Yep.
Okay. He's done a few
things.
things.
A late night. That was a late night.
It was, right? You were doing something for hospital, right? Yeah.
The hospital, yeah.
So a few things you might have heard of that he's done. Spuds MacKenzie, Carnival Cruise Lines, Wheaties with Michael Jordan. We can tell that story maybe another time. Some great video and footage on that one. And many, many more. So Troy's been at it for a very long time, hardly his first rodeo. Then there's me, okay, and the funny thing is when I show this picture, they're like, dude, do you drink daiquiris? That's me. That's not my drink. That actually was my drink, which I think was a ginger ale, okay. I've been a trial consultant for 15 years. I've been in communication for 25 years. And, the thing that I did before doing advertising, I was a former U.S. government official. It's a long story on how I wound up doing that. But I was in places like here, and here, and here, and here when I worked in government. I even wrote speeches once in a while for this guy. So I've done a fair amount of stuff that you've never seen, or rather knew it was me, but you've definitely seen. I've also worked in technology for about the last 20 years in terms of building successful blogs and podcasts and advertising campaigns and websites. Back in the days when I used to work on international policy issues, I was also published a lot in the newspaper. And I've had the unique pleasure to deliver speeches before Parliament, the United Nations, NATO, and places like that. So that's a little bit about our backgrounds. So I want to go through real quick today's seminar strategy in terms of how it's laid out. It's really kind of a two-part strategy that fits together with two people. So Troy's going to talk about conceptualizing visually how to execute a visual strategy, and we're going to have examples. And I think you're going to find it interesting in terms of what we present as the framework. Okay, and then once Troy's done, I'm going to talk about essentially the business end of it in terms of how do you monetize these strategies and use in your business. So if you followed any of our stuff a lot, we talk about what we call the step 2 problem, right? And step 1 is, have this idea. Step 3 is huge profits. Question is, well, what do you do in the middle to bridge those two things? That's what my part of the presentation is going to be about. So again, at the end, we'll have questions from the audience, just some housekeeping issues so that, we don't get peppered. Yes, this is being recorded. Yes, you'll be able to get it. Yes, it will be archived. Yes, it will be available at Brand Media Studio. Yes, you'll be able to download these slides. Yes, everything's going to be available. So please just relax, enjoy. This isn't college. There's no tests, okay? So just be cool and enjoy yourselves for the next hour or so, roughly, and everything will be available so you can study it as often as you want. And, of course, you can always email us at editor@brandmediastudio.com. So with that, let me turn it over to my partner, Troy.
Hello. So we're going to talk about conceptualizing visually, and the question I want to start with is, what's your company's album cover? Now, every company has a set of words called a tagline that sums up what they're all about. but they really don't have an image usually. And album covers are a great way, because they're sort of neutral territory. They capture what an artist or an album is all about in one captivating image. And the good covers become cultural icons that define a brand. They cement their positioning in the minds of their fans. The album covers offer a unique lesson in branding and positioning. By studying album covers, we can learn how to use visual content to actually define a brand, because before MTV, the album cover really was the visual content of any band. So think of the visual as a hammer and your message as a nail. Now this is sort of an old thing that's been around for a while, but the visual drives the message into the mind of the audience. Most album covers are usually just a cool photo of the artist or the band. And likewise, most brands, they just take a photograph of their product and put it up on Instagram and think somebody's going to be interested in that. But great album covers tell a story and go well beyond product shots. So I wanted to ask, does your company have an album cover? Just think about it for a second. Do you have an image that you would say, yes, that's our album cover? Can you sum up what your company is all about with just one striking and a memorable image? I mean, that's a tall order these days. And I think it's worth considering, because there's lots of people out there who can talk to you about content, but it's usually words. And we're going to talk about pictures. So my question is, have you ever tried to sum up your brand in just one visual? I think we can look at some of the all-time greats to see what we can learn from them, and I thought we would start with the Beatles. Now, if we start with the Beatles, one of their first albums was called With the Beatles. It featured their four faces on a black background. It wasn't really that creative, but the point was, as the title indicates, it was to introduce you to the Beatles. And obviously, you know, they took the country by storm, and eventually they moved away from bubblegum pop tunes like I Want to Hold Your Hand, and they moved on to things like Sgt. Pepper. Now, their work on Sgt. Pepper was really advanced, so the album cover was much more advanced. That's pretty, but think about that. That's way before Photoshop. Somebody put that all together by hand. So Sgt. Pepper not only reflects the more sophisticated, worldly approach to their music, but it set them apart from other bands, and it actually introduced the whole idea of a concept album. And then as time went on, there's the iconic Abbey Road album cover. Now, the Beatles have reached their zenith of popularity by this time. They're already musical legends, and now the urban legends start to surface around the imagery and what it means, like Paul not having any shoes. Is he dead? That was the big thing. And you know, this album cover has actually become a meme over time. I mean, there's versions of it with dogs, The Simpsons.
Yeah, exactly. The Simpsons, especially.
Right. I mean, I mean, my friend Steve Bravoff, who's a huge Beatles fan, has gone there and taken his picture on that crosswalk. So, you know, that's a great thing. When your image starts to get parodied, you know that you struck a nerve, that you've got something that's going to stick. So as far as all the Beatles album covers, this one, I think, represents them the most, has lived on and has taken on a life of its own and lasted a lot longer than actually the Beatles have. Now, the Rolling Stones were the bad boys of rock at the time, around the same time as the Beatles. And of course, their Sticky Fingers cover quite literally put that fact right in your face. And this thing actually created a lot of talk value around who or what was actually filling out those jeans. And you know, great visuals can do that. The visual content actually creates talk value, which we call, you know, sharing today. And back in those days, it was called talk value. The Clash rose to the top of punk rock with their London Calling album. Now, the image captures their angst, the stage presence, the anarchistic approach to their music. Just take a look at that for a second. It's in black and white. It's blurry. There's dramatic lighting. And it just captures the essence of the band right there, the whole punk rock scene in one picture. This next one is unique. The Pink Floyd's album cover, Dark Side of the Moon. You think about it. This is a dark, heavy metal band with a rainbow and a prism for an album cover. Now, I think it probably worked because most of us were high when we were listening to that album, but I think it's really simple. And we still see people wearing this on their black T-shirt today. I mean, I just saw one the other day of a guy walking through the mall and had this as a T-shirt. I mean, this has gone for 40 years. This image has outlasted. I don't think anybody would have predicted that this would be the image that lives longer than Pink Floyd itself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about in rock and roll, there's really maybe only one other rock and roll icon, and that would be the lips for Rolling Stones, right?
Right. I mean, the great logo. I mean, that's a great logo. I don't know if it was ever an album cover, but I think it's obviously one of the greatest logos of all time. But I think when you think about the album covers, like if you go to the next one, the Hotel California. Now, this album sold a bazillion copies. And you look at what that album cover is. It's got the smoggy sunset in the background, because sunsets in LA are never clear. They're always smoggy like that. You've got the silhouettes of the palm trees. You've even got this sort of crazy blue neon lettering down in the corner. It looks like it belongs on the side of a van somewhere in the late 70s, some van that's got a bed in the back. I mean, all that stuff just sums up what California was about at the time. And it's, of course, it's one of the biggest selling albums of all time.
Well, and the funny thing is, too, when you look at the album cover, and I know we've talked about this, is the album cover, right? The Eagles wrote Hotel California as a criticism of what life in LA was like in the 70s. You know, their version of what the grind was like. Of course, you know, it's taken on a meaning of its own, and you've had people saying it's about, you know, a song about redemption or going to hell and all these other things. And the Eagles are like, that's not what the song's about. Look at what we've said and look at what the pictures are. So anyway.
Well, and think about the last few album covers. None of them are pictures of the band members. It's not their four faces. It's not even them performing. It's a concept of what the album is about.
Exactly.
The graphic represents that concept rather than the literal translation of, I mean, I know there's a song called Hotel California on the album, but it represents a bigger idea than that, including the next one with Bruce Springsteen. His Born in the USA album, and just take a look at the elements here. You got the American flag, blue jeans, worn blue jeans, a white T-shirt, a red baseball cap. I mean, it's quintessentially American. I mean, that album cover captures everything that, you know, 4th of July, hot dogs, apple pie, Chevrolet, it's all in there in one image. There's nobody's face, just his rear end, but it captures the whole ethos of what Bruce was singing about in that album. The next one is from Metallica. Now, this one is called the Black Album. Metallica sold 16 million records. Now, that's a heavy metal band. Usually they sell less than 1 million. So this thing really crossed over and sold a bazillion records. And all they have on there, it's totally black. There's the logo, their Metallica font, and the snake from the Don't Tread on Me flag in a dull varnish. You can barely see it. I hope you can see it.
I'm gonna post a link as for the archive. I'll post a link to a higher end graphic of it. It may be tough to see given how the go to webinar pixelates.
But hopefully you can see it, and if not, you can Google it. It comes up instantly. But the point is, it totally captured where the band was at the moment. They were in such turmoil. They hated each other. They were ready to break up, and yet they generated some of the darkest, coolest music. They had songs like Enter Sandman, My Friend of Misery, Sad But True, The Struggle Within. I mean, these are not happy tunes, people. And this album cover really captures where they were at. Now, if go back to the 70s a little bit, bands like Wild Cherry and the Ohio Players, they use sex to sell a lot of albums. Sex always sells, it always has. Miley, Rihanna, Nicki Minaj, they do the same thing. And it's real easy if you're willing to go there. It's not hard to do. I think today some people have kind of forgotten what metaphor is. You know, if you look at the Wild Cherry and the Ohio Players album, it's a little more suggestive than maybe what's going on today, where it's just right there in your face. But I think it's an easy thing to do if that's part of your brand personality. It's not hard, and but it does work every time. And those album covers, those are two I remember from that era, obviously. Now, the kings of using album cover artist content is the band Kiss. Now, Bryan, I don't want to hear about the shitty music because I already know. So I have to tell you, and I don't care.
Hey, I don't mind Kiss, for the record.
Everybody says they suck. I get it. It's not about the music. That's the beauty of this whole exercise is let's look at how their album covers actually capture the brand and not the band Kiss. All right, let's look at their first album cover. Oh, wow, it looks just like the Beatles, except it's a little different. It's 4 faces on a black background. There's 4 different faces. but it's similar. It's one of their first albums, and it was a way to introduce themselves to the band, to the world. And then they moved on to, like a lot of bands, they moved on to hiring great designers like Michael Dord, who designed this album cover. This is all done by hand. There's no illustrator here. This guy draws all this by hand, draws all by hand.
Yeah, again, we'll put the link in, for the archive. There's a whole story behind his illustration of this Michael Dord's site. Yeah.
This has become a meme too. I mean, I've seen this album cover redone with the four faces from South Park on it. It's very funny. But and you had to do this kind of album design when you were on a shelf in a store. Of course, those days are long gone. But back in those days, you had to have an album cover that stood out among the millions of other albums that were in the record store at the time.
Though, you bring up a good point right there, and I just, you may be going, why are these guys talking about album covers? One of the things that I think, when we talked about this and we looked at these things, think about, if you're our age, okay, if you're in your 40s, you remember record stores and things like that. And record stores were a microcosm of what visual content is online now, where you had lots of great content, very little attention. Okay, so if you wanted to capture somebody with an image, I mean, take a look at this image from Kiss. Okay, it's visually exciting, it's arresting, it gets you to pay attention to it. Okay, and so album covers, in terms of trying to sell in that millisecond in the record store, is very analogous to where you are right now in terms of your one voice in a sea of millions producing content. I mean, my understanding is, this is the extreme. Every second of YouTube, 96 hours of video are uploaded. Okay, Imgur, which we're going to talk about later, gets literally millions of photographs uploaded to it every day. We're awash in content. What we don't have is attention. And so this was a very similar microcosm to what, if you wanted to sell records, you had to have a stunning, visual depiction or you were lost.
So that's a good point. So soon enough, though, it became really apparent that the Kiss live shows were way better than any of their studio music. Their shows were like Roman spectacles that featured fire and smoke and epic lighting effects. I've been to two of them. One of them I spent in the very front row. So when the Kiss Alive album came out, you can see the album cover is them playing live on a stage with a little bit of smoke and the logo, and it's. But the idea here is that it's alive. It's not just alive. It's just not live. It's alive. And where it really comes alive, now this is a double album. When it really comes alive is when you open it up, and this is the spread. Now, I'm in the front row of this show when I'm 15 years old. And I have to tell you that drum riser is 40 feet tall. Those platforms that the guitar players are standing on are 20 feet high. Those flames, you could feel the heat. The confetti landed on top of me. It was an assault on your senses. And when I saw this album cover, I knew I had to go to the show. That was what convinced me to go to the show. And you get a real feeling of that the band has come alive actually in the album. And I think that's one of the things that, how do you bring your product alive in visual content? And this is a good example of how to do that. And even if you turn to the back page, when you fold the back cover of the album, you see these two knuckleheads, the long-haired guy. I kind of look like the guy on the right at the time. They're in Cobo Hall in Detroit, Michigan. They're about right before the show. Somebody took them. Now, talk about user-generated content. Here's some guys. They made their own little poster. They got their picture taken by somebody, and it ended up on the back of an album that sold millions and millions of records. And I remember sitting and looking at this record, and these two guys are actually still around. They saved their poster, and you can actually get your picture taken with them. Obviously, they've gotten a haircut. They've put on a few pounds, just like everybody else. But you can actually get your picture taken with these two knuckleheads and, be part of the Kiss Army, which is, all a big part of it. It's hard to deny the longevity and popularity of the Kiss shows. I mean, yeah, the music's not that great. They haven't made a record in a long time. The music's not that great, but the album cover visuals really helped make the Kiss brand. It created a real desire to attend Kiss shows and buy all that merchandise that Gene Simmons is so famous for. Even the Kiss coffin, the Kiss condoms, they have everything. None of that would have happened without these visuals. And the visuals made the brand more valuable than the band. So you have to remember that when you're talking about using visuals as a strategy in content, it's about creating an image that's good enough to be on an album cover. So how can you create visuals that you could use that could be on your album cover? What's the one visual that captures your brand? Is there one? Now, the clients I work with in the past, they'd say, whoa, wait a minute, one image? Are you insane? I can't just pick one image. We're diversified. We don't want to leave anything out. We offer a wide range of solutions for our customers. Nobody cares. I only care about my problem and the solution you have for me. I don't care about your 82 options you have for other people. So I only care about what works for me. So you need to focus. You need to take that spray nozzle on the end of your marketing hose and from wide spray down to jet, and you need to blast away. That's what needs to happen. Because if you keep this image right here from Seabourn Cruises, now I was working in the cruise industry when this image came out, and this one image, it established their brand and created a long-lasting impression that the competition couldn't even compete with. I mean, if you're spending $20,000 to go on a cruise for a week, this is the kind of service you expect. And it demonstrates the level of luxury that most other people can't compete with. So if I'm gonna start to create this kind of image, I have to ask this one question: what's your story? All right? Think about that for a second. What is your story as a brand? It's my question when I ask new people. When I meet new people, I go, hey, what's your story? And I say, what do you mean? I go, start from the beginning. Where were you born? So I get to know you a little bit. And I think it's a go-to question when you start producing content for yourself. Now, this is Taylor Swift, obviously. She's the master of Instagram. She does a great job of mixing her famous life with her personal life. She rewards her fans by giving them a backstage pass into her life. Maybe you could do the same thing. Maybe you could give people a backstage pass to your brand. Let them know what's going on. I mean, the funny picture here in the middle where she's performing at some award show, down in the corner where the cursor is, there's a lime, a little green lime lying on the stage. And when she posted this picture, she's like, I really love this photo, but I don't know what that random lime is doing there. So even in her greatest moments, she has a bit of humility, which is really great for her because she could easily be obnoxious. But she really handles her. I would recommend following her. Another person I would recommend following is Michael Kors. He does a great job of really defining the vision of his fashion and all of his collections. There's the color stories, the fabric stories, the lifestyle. It's all on display and it's all very cohesive. If you look at Michael Kors' Instagram feed, it is very well curated. Everything links to the next thing and so on, and you can see the progression of where all the products come from and how they fit together. Dominic Ansel is the guy who invented the cronut, which got a lot of play last year, or 2 years ago. And he makes and shoots food porn, basically. All his sweet treats are treated as objects of desire. Foodies love them and share these photos every single day. And he has a great following on Instagram, and he creates some really great desserts and sweet treats, obviously. But he does a really good job of photographing them all and sharing them. And, you know, he created a whole trend out of nothing. I mean, he combined a croissant and a donut and he became the talk of the town. Who would have ever thought?
I don't know what that custard is with the vanilla bean, but that looks really good.
It's awfully good, doesn't it? I don't know what it is, but it makes you want to try it. The Blue Bottle Coffee Company in Oakland. It's a little tiny coffee place. It's not Starbucks. It's not, you know, Beanery. It's real small. But they do a really good job of helping their customers dive really deep into the story behind their coffee. They have beautiful photos that tell the story of the coffee's origin, the preparation, how people enjoy it. And the people share the photos amongst themselves. They've created a nice little community all around the Blue Bottle Coffee just right there in Oakland. It's a local thing. It's not a big national brand or anything. It's a local coffee place that who understands their customer. And it's almost like that microbrewery mentality where they want to know everything about their coffee. Going back to big brands is Carl's Jr. Now, of course, they mix giant burgers with giant boobs to great effect on their Instagram page. Their fun and irreverent brand personality, it comes through pretty well, I think, and loud and clear. The photography isn't all that great, to be honest. It's not, mind-blowing photography, but the content is truly targeted to their core audience, which is, young guys who can eat burgers with a stack of fries and not throw up afterwards. Cosmetic firms do a really good job, and there's a bunch of them, so I don't have any brand names on this one because I think a lot of them are doing this really well. Cosmetic firms give how-to videos to their followers and recruit brand ambassadors to create a more approachable and authentic visual content. A lot of stuff like cosmetic, they've got movie stars and supermodels, and everybody looks great all the time. But they do a really good job on Instagram and with Vine videos and YouTube, of course. And they allow the audience to co-create the brand story because they can show how a regular girl can look great. And I think this is another way of really being able to generate visual content that connects. It doesn't scare off people. So, I'm never going to look like Heidi Klum. I'm never going to look like Halle Berry, but I could look like that girl.
Well, and I have two daughters, and they watch the Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest of various cosmetic manufacturers, and they then want to try what they see. So as far as I'm concerned, it's way more effective than television advertising ever was for CoverGirl or anything like that.
Well, think about it. They sit and watch a CoverGirl commercial, and you go, oh, there's Ellen DeGeneres. She looks great. Okay, or there's Halle Berry or whoever they've hired this week. Versus, hey, they made that girl over with that new lustrous pink. I'm going to go buy that because I want to try that. I mean, which one leads to sales?
That's exactly
right?
it. That's exactly it.
Yeah. Okay, so next is GoPro. Now, of course, it's hard to match GoPro when it comes to amazing visual content. Their audience makes incredible videos pretty much every day. I mean, it's posting. They're constantly getting new stuff. But their product users are doing amazing things with, and they do an amazing job of distributing it all across multiple platforms, not just Instagram. It's not really a fair fight. I wouldn't even attempt to say, okay, I'm going to be in the action sports photography world, because it's really not fair. It'd be hard to, but it's worth admiring them on what they're able to accomplish with, which is pretty much kind of a crappy camera. I mean, I have two of them, and the camera's not much better than any other lipstick camera or any other action camera that is being made right now, but their content is so much better than everybody else's, because I think they were first, and I think they do a good job of curating it. Now this next one here, this what you're looking at here, is from a website called Dronestagram, which obviously combines drones and Instagram. Now, I think the beauty of this is a bird's eye view can make everyday things look pretty exciting. And this site is kind of mesmerizing to look at when you think about, okay, maybe you've got sort of a boring product. Well, maybe if I shoot it from a drone, it would look really awesome. A red dress is a red dress, but a red dress shot from a drone on a salt flat is an exciting photograph. Or maybe that's that eagle flying over there. Maybe you've got some waterfront property to sell, and it doesn't look that great from the ground, but from the air, you get the idea of exactly where it is. So I think the perspective of the drone could give you some interesting perspective on your brand. The furniture store West Elm, they utilize user-generated photos on 40% of their website. There are over 18,000 photos with the hashtag MyWestElm. And they link to similar products across all their social media. The brand and its fans actually co-create the visual content for West Elm's 2 million unique monthly visitors. Now, they're a furniture store. Yeah, they got stuff just like Crate and Barrel, just like everybody else. It's all kind of similar.
Now, one of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit is curating content. I mean, so these three images are all user-generated images, and even if 99% of what you get isn't useful, if you're somebody like them, they probably get what, at least 500 to 1,000 images a month that are suitable enough to choose from?
Well, yeah. Think about it. If you got 2 million people submitting photographs, you're going to get some good ones. So let's look at how some brands actually use album covers, and it has to go beyond a great shot of the product. So let's look at some who've actually gotten it right. The first one would be Absolute. Now, of course, it's the product shot, isn't it? So I just contradicted myself. So I'm not sure they should be on the list, but their ads were so good for so long that I feel like that is an album cover worthy image right there. And I feel like it's been running for 30 years. And if you go to the next slide, you can see they've kind of lost their way. The ads aren't as focused as they used to be. They're not as clear and simple, and they don't tell a story quite as well. I don't know what that thing is on the right, that orange thing. So I
Looks
feel
like a wooden bagel or something.
I don't know, it's a wooden bagel exuding insulation, expanding insulation foam. I don't know what that. I don't know what that is. But 30 years later, they're still going strong. So bravo to them. I'm not going to criticize them, but I just feel like there might be some better stuff, like this Coca-Cola image that, for 90 years, this image was created back in the 20s, Brian. And
yeah.
It's been how we visualize Santa Claus ever since.
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting story to this. So the picture we're looking at here is most likely illustrated by a guy by the name of Haddon Sundblom. And the guy actually in the photograph was Sundblom's neighbor. His name is Lou Prentice. So Santa Claus is a real guy for all these illustrations. But yeah, it was first illustrated in 1930 by Frank Misen for the Saturday Evening Post. And his depiction was based on Clement Moore's "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." But the funny thing is they've been drawing Santa pretty much forever. Since Coca-Cola has been in business, they've been drawing Santa. And the Santas prior to 1930 were based on, and here's a case of how conceptualization actually changes culture. Santa was depicted up until these images that you're seeing here in the 1930s essentially as an elf. And there's a very famous... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Like a little elf, like
yes.
A guy who's too tall, not a big, jolly man.
Like Elf on the Shelf, but he was green, okay? And that was a illustration by Thomas Nast, okay? Which was also it was in Harper's Weekly, it was also in the Saturday Evening Post. But the Darcy agency, who was Coca-Cola's agency, wanted to project a Santa that they felt was more beneficial to them. And so Frank Misen, who was an illustrator, draws a Santa very similar to this in 1930. And then Frank Misen and Haddon Sundblom, I think this is Sundblom's illustration just looking at it, they basically drew Santa for like all of Western civilization from 1930 to 1964. And so now you're buying them as collector's items, but these images are, anywhere between 60 to, 40 years old.
Another big brand that has an iconic character are the Clydesdales. Now, August Bush himself used his own personal Clydesdale team to deliver beer to the White House to celebrate the end of Prohibition. So what was that, 36, somewhere in there?
1933 is when Prohibition would have...
Right, so since 1933, Budweiser has used the Clydesdales, and to great effect. I mean, all the way up to Super Bowl commercials now. We're used to seeing them. And, that icon it's beloved, it was, what was it, 70, 85 years ago. And these Clydesdales are still... And oftentimes when people do reporting on Budweiser, that's what they show. They show the Clydesdales because everybody loves them. Whether you like the beer or not, people like the Clydesdales for sure. Which brings me to the Marlboro Man, the greatest print campaign probably ever. Now look at this print ad. There's no package shot. There's no copy. There's no tagline. It's just the cowboy image and the name. Turned sideways, by the way, not even readable. And I think over time, the cowboy image became more powerful than even the packaging. But, I mean, that looks like an album cover. If I was doing a Western album of manly music, that's pretty much what it would look like.
That'd be tough to find today.
Right? But I think that's, if I'm Jason Aldean, that's what my album cover should look like probably.
Yeah, probably.
And moving on to 1984 Girl and the famous Apple commercial from the Super Bowl that, this thing set the standard for all Super Bowl commercials moving forward. The woman, her name's Anya Major. She was an English athlete and actress. She was cast by Ridley Scott, who shot this commercial, the famous movie director. And this is the image that people use most often when they talk about that commercial, which, has some pretty striking imagery in it. There's the theater full of zombie people. There's the Big Brother guy up on the screen, but she's the one that kind of stands out, I think mostly because of the red shorts, to be honest. But And she actually has I've never noticed it before, she actually looks to have like a Macintosh logo on her shirt. And I swear I have never noticed that till this second. It appears to be like a Mac SE drawn in brushstrokes, which was their logo back in the olden days. Wow, I never noticed that. I think that's an image. Now this Maxell tape, I can't even remember what the Maxell logo looks like. I know I had some back in the day, but this image, it really defined the power of the tape's quality. I mean, and they actually made a commercial out of this one image as well, if you remember. And this thing actually became a meme too, almost overnight. Even before we knew what memes were, people were recreating this image on their own and use it and spreading it around. And I think it's one of the most powerful images. You know, because you have to remember they were up against Memorex, you know, where Ella Fitzgerald would hit the high note and the glass would break.
Oh, that's right.
So how do you, right? So yeah. How do you say your tape is even better than that? Well, you blow people away with the power, and you know that's the image that they came up with, which I think is a striking album cover type image. Volvo, of course, their positioning was safety. And this image, I think, is the early 80s. I think this really solidified, you know, my car can stand up to just about anything. And, of course, the headline says it can stand up to heavy traffic. But what they're really saying is it can stand up to accidents. It can stand up to being crushed by a truck on the highway. And I think this is a very striking image that's been hard for me to forget, that's for sure. And then they moved on, just quite recently, I think it was a year or two ago, they had Jean-Claude Van Damme. They helped them generate 77 million views on YouTube on what would otherwise be a pretty boring truck video of their trucks. And you know, this thing took off like wildfire. And of course, it was, you know, parodied with Chuck Norris on airplanes and all kinds of good stuff. But 77 million views from one guy doing the splits between two trucks. Who would have ever thought that that was possible? But I mean, that's an album cover image. And even David Ogilvy, the master of headline and copy, he knew that a compelling image could create an entire backstory for the branded dress shirts. He did it again even with the Captain Schweppes for, you know, the guy with the beard and the, you know, I think he had a pipe and stuff. So even David Ogilvy, the wordsmith, knew that imagery what it could do for you. So when you start thinking about your brand as an album cover, it keeps you from creating visual content that actually looks like an ad. It's visual content. It forces you to think visually. It forces you to create long-lasting images, not just here today, here tomorrow. And it forces you to create a hammer to drive that nail home. You think about it, most people just decorate the words with their visuals. They don't actually use the visual to support the word.
Oh, are you still there, Troy? Oh, just hold on one second.
I'm there. I'm here.
Okay.
It forces you to focus, right?
Yeah.
Forces you to focus, and lastly, it forces you to tell a story. I mean, if you think about all these images that we showed you, they all tell a story in some way. They tell you more than the product, more than just, hey, here's our product, you should like it. There's a story behind why you should like the product.
Well, great. Now I'm going to give Troy a rest for a moment. And so, you know, the first part of this presentation was really to give you a sense of what makes for good imagery in terms of communicating brand and organizational values and principles. And so, you can produce it, okay? And we're going to have other seminars where we talk about, you know, how to produce these things. Today's seminar is really not so much nuts and bolts of how to take a photo. But I suspect after, you know, Troy's presentation, you're now not thinking in ways that you probably before the seminar, right? You would shoot pictures that were literal, right, and not illustrative like we've shown you with these. And so the whole idea was to give you essentially an affinity and a sense for what makes good brand photography, for lack of a better description. What makes for, you know, iconography that can communicate value. And so then the second thing here is, you know, where I'm at is now we're going to talk about how do you trade pictures for revenue. Okay, this is the mechanics of, you know, if you could make these images, how do you then capitalize on them? Because it doesn't just happen, I'll tell you that much. So there's two really big box strategies, okay, in terms of how we could organize things. There's a curation value approach and a fascination value approach. And one's really about, curation is about finding other people's good stuff, like what we've done today with all of the album covers, and explaining why, they're good and, providing them to you so you can get value out of them without having to figure this out yourself. And the second I call a fascination value approach. And I'm somewhat stealing from Sally Hogshead's notion of creating things that naturally draw people in through fascination. And definitely when you're creating visuals, that's the other type of approach you're going to follow. So let's talk real briefly about what is curation. So it's funny because I think the internet has gone full circle. I was on the internet back when it was horrendous, when there were no graphics, it was all text, okay? And you couldn't find anything, right? The internet was allegedly this great stuff where you can get access to all this information at all these universities. It was painful to find anything, okay? And then around 1994, you had Yahoo, okay? And it was bad. The internet was awful. You had like gray backgrounds with black text, and it was just brutal, right? And you had really 8-bit graphics. It was terrible. But Yahoo was hand-curated content from the internet. And so everyone used to submit their stuff, and then Yahoo would look at it and go, okay, this is good, this is not. If it's good stuff, here's where it goes. This is what bin it goes in, and it's kind of like the internet catalog, right? The library catalog of the internet in the early days. And back then in the 90s, there were only 500,000 websites. It wasn't the way it is now. And so in curation, you demonstrate your expertise in knowing what's good. And you're unclogging the clutter so that people then rely on you to give them the good stuff. That's the value of what curating does. Now, here's a Pinterest page for Bonnie Zhang. And I'll have links in the studio for her on the thing. And so I got to take a quick look at my notes here, because first, she's one of the top 30 followed people on Pinterest. Okay, she's a commercial photographer, primarily of interiors, travel, and food. Okay, she's got 23,000 followers on Instagram. She's got 20,000 plus followers on Twitter. She's routinely someone who is lecturing on photography at like South by Southwest, which I think just ended. She's given speeches there and things like that. And so she is looked at as someone who knows what the good stuff is in terms of travel, fashion, and architectural photography. And so here's as I drilled down on her page, here's her men's fashion type things. Okay, and look at the number of repins and the likes and things like that. These are not photographs she's taken. Now, she is a photographer, but this is not her work. She's curating it for others. But let me go back and show you the one thing. Okay, 7.5 million followers. Okay, talk about building an audience. And now, I have not looked at this in great detail to know if none of the photographs are her work. But I can tell you that I know most of these photographs are not her work. So this is primarily curation that she's using to demonstrate her eye, okay? And so she builds then trust with others about that, okay? And so that leads me to this question. If you're going to do a curation approach, what's your value in content curation? What are you providing your audience? Okay, and I'd argue if you're going to do a curator approach, then basically you have to provide what I call the super crack content. Okay, going back to, Troy's album cover for Kiss and the platforms and whatnot, for people who, wanted that experience, that's like super crack content, right? Here's this thing and you're part of the Kiss army and this, that, and the other thing. If you're into fashion, this is super crack content. Okay, she's got the best of the best. So if you're going to curate, you better curate nothing but epic content. Okay, because people just don't have time. I was reading a blog post about podcasting, And the guy did a quick thing. He goes, okay, so what podcast should I listen to? Okay. And everyone's got their own favorite podcast. And he goes, geez, if I only take the top 50 and I listen to the top, 1 hour of the top 50, I got to listen nonstop for 2 days. Okay. That's the challenge right now of what people have to deal with in terms of there's so much content, so little attention. So they're going to, if you're curating, they're going to rely on you to really give them the super crack content and expand for them without the audience having to go and find on its own more great content, epic content like what you provided them. Okay, and again, if you look at Bonnie's site, it's all super crack content all the way down. Okay, whatever vertical you want to choose, style, women's, living spaces, etc. It's all amazing stuff. Now, here's a website you may not have seen before or know about. This is Imgur, okay? And Imgur is the image curator of the internet, all of it, okay? It's been around. I want to say it's been around for at least 5 years. I think it's closer to like 7 years that it's been around. And as it says up here, the most viral images on the internet sorted by popularity. Okay, so when I took this, Forrest Gump was #1. I'm not sure why. This looks like Donkey Kong or something like that. And there are memes and things like that. All of this content is all submitted by others. It's all curation. Essentially, this is the Google image type engine approach. They have used social signals and they have used algorithms to determine what's the most viral, what's the most popular. So this mosaic changes constantly. Imgur is the 10th most popular site in the United States, and it's the 35th most popular in the entire world. And they don't create a single piece of content. So curation is a legitimate way to build pipelines in Instagram, in Pinterest, in whatever visual media you want to choose, but you have to use the concepts that we taught in the first part of this course about understanding album covers and what makes for epic content and whatnot to put together that super crack content. So what are you going to get in exchange if you follow this type of approach? Well, I'd argue you get attention, you get information, and you get money. You get attention, which is always valuable. You get information, which is going to allow remarketing. Okay? And you get their money, which is always valuable. So just looking at Imgur, what do they get? Well, they get 1.8 billion unique visitors a year. What do they get in terms of information? They know what's created, and they know what's shared visually. They're probably in the most unique position of anybody on the internet to know what the visual stream of consciousness is around the world. And finally, they get money. They used to sell subscriptions. They don't do that anymore. They think they recently got, for 10% of the company, they got $300 million. Okay, that means the company is valued at $3 billion, roughly. Not bad for a website that doesn't generate any of their own content. But they make money through advertising revenues, and they make money, quite frankly, selling the analytic data on what is shared and why and what's popular. So the second type of approach is this fascination approach, okay? And so curation is demonstrating your expertise in finding the good stuff. Fascination approach is demonstrating your expertise in actually creating and knowing what it is I want to see. Okay, so you're creating the good stuff then that keeps people interested, that builds these warm fuzzies. Now, I think if GoPro's unfair for the lipstick camera type shots, National Geographic's unfair for anything relating to anthropology, geology, or landscapes. Okay, other than people like Kim Kardashian, look at this, 13.1 million followers. And it's funny too, because I'll work with people and they'll be like, oh, what I photograph, what my stuff is, it just really isn't interesting. I mean, it's interesting to me, but it's not interesting to other people. Okay, we have a photograph of a rock, We have photographs of a tree, stars, a brook. Okay, I mean, if I just said, yeah, we're going to get 13 million followers taking pictures of rocks and trees and whatnot, you'd say, yeah, okay, you're nuts. But there we are. Okay.
That's a cool rock, though.
It is a cool rock. We're going to talk about the rock. There's the rock. For me, the rock looks like a chicken about to be crushed by a hand that's holding like a rock. Okay. So I'm not sure, people see things in clouds, but, now, this picture I think is taken in Egypt, looking at the sand and the background and everything. I'm guessing it's Egypt. But look at this in terms of picture of a rock, 308,000 comments. Picture of a rock. Okay. Now it's a cool rock, but still nevertheless is a rock. All right. But for their audience, this is super crack content. Okay. And if you go to National Geographic on Instagram, again, this is a company that has built an infrastructure to do visual imagery from the beginning. So, of course, they have the most amazing photography under the sun. But I will tell you this much. I would be willing to bet more people have seen this image than get their magazine. I'd be very surprised to hear if magazine subscriptions are more than 250, 300,000. Okay. Yet they've got 300,000 looks and touches with their brand on one image. Okay. And again, just like we talked about, for curation strategy, with a fascination strategy, you have to answer again. The question is, what value does my content provide? And you are showing them your stories. Okay. So when we talked about, what's your album cover and things like that, the question is, how are you going to tell your story in a visual way that makes viewers happy and intrigued to know more? And the other thing that you're doing when you create this visual imagery is you're demonstrating your value, and you're doing it in such a way that you provide your customers with a sense of who you are so that you can build trust. Now, I found this is a company that refurbishes knickknacks and things like that in order to make them kind of like antique furniture. And here were 4 projects that they were working on, I swear. I think number 3 is an old chicken cage or something. I'm not certain on that, but it looks like a lobster cage or something. But they're turning these things into the things that they'll sell. And if you go to their Instagram page, you can see things in the various stages of their restoration. Okay, that's the backstage pass that Troy was talking about. There's a backstage pass into how they select what they're selecting and what they're doing. Okay, and so it says, are you looking for an interesting coffee table solution? Here's some ideas that they have of what they're working on. Here's another woman who makes vintage clothing, okay? And some of this is curation and some of this is her stuff. So this is kind of a hybrid strategy. But she sells vintage clothing that she makes primarily through Etsy and other places. And so she's curated content, but she's also created content. And so she has created, though, in that process, a unique experience and establishing herself as not only, hey, I know what the good stuff is, and here's examples of it, but I know how to make it too. And again, look at her followers. I would imagine a boutique vintage clothing shop, because I can't imagine that, this is not rag stock. This is not people walking in and spending $50. I have to imagine that these things are quite expensive. A boutique clothing store like that maybe sees 500 real customers a year, maybe 1,000. And so this woman is generating interest anywhere between 6 to 10 times what she might see if she just had her store. Another one is Holstein. Now they create, I was trying to figure out how to describe them. It's kind of like the Buddha meets Anthony Robbins is kind of how I see them. They have a manifesto. I don't know how else to really describe it. I mean, this thing over here, this manifesto that they have, and I'll have some links for you to look at, but they've got this, manifesto of how you should live your life and this, that, and the other thing. And
it's Jack Handy's Deep Thoughts from Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's Jack Handy's Deep Thoughts.
Exactly. But it's actually really good stuff. I mean, but it's amazing imagery that they have. And they do have, even their manifesto that they've put together, you can just see visually, it's not just here's some words, right? It's more than just here's some words, okay? Let me just, sorry, 1 second here. Okay, and then finally, I wanted to talk about J. Crew. Now, here, one second while I pull up my notes, because I thought this was amazing when I did the background on this. Okay, so this is J. Crew's 2014 catalog. In 2013, they didn't have a social media department, and they had nothing online. So in 1 year, they go from nothing to their catalog is in Pinterest. Okay, why? Well, in large measure, at least what they're willing to admit to publicly, is they realized, hey, look, Pinterest is a huge marketplace, and it's the fashion designer's dream venue. And so they went through the process of creating essentially super crack content. They shot all these images and whatnot that they did. They shot it all for digital. It's not, you know, you will see some of the stuff in print, but most of the stuff that they shot for digital. And they did it explicitly for Pinterest, and they put their catalog up online. And it got them talk value. It also got them a notoriety. Okay, they have, I forget when I took this picture, but they have more followers than what's here. But you know, again, the thing is what do we get for our love? Right? It's the same thing again: attention, information, and money. All right, and so if we look at J. Crew, what do they get? Well, they got a lot of attention. They got written up in media. I mean, they released their catalog, and they got written up in pretty much fashion, social media, you know, media about social media, not just within social media, but fashion channels, social media channels, and marketing channels for releasing their catalog. Okay, if Sears and Roebuck puts out a catalog, I don't think there's going to be that type of reply. Okay, even if they put it on the internet now at this point. They, most importantly, they get information. They can see what's pinned. They can see what's shared out of all their stuff. They essentially put all of their stuff out there to see how people react to it and what do they do with it. That is amazing analytics for a retailer.
Well, think about that, Brian. Think about that if you're a fashion retailer where the life cycle of a product is about 6 weeks.
Right.
It only lasts full price for 6 weeks, and then it gets cut in half, and then cut in half again, until finally it's, you know, $9 on the rack and out the door, off to China somewhere, to be absorbed into third world countries. So you got 6 weeks to sell the stuff. So the analytics, by releasing the images ahead of time, you'll know what the order. You'll have a better idea of what the orders are going to be, and how much volume you're going to get out of each individual garment. Because it's such a short window, it's almost as bad as the movies where you get 1 weekend to make it or break it. Fashion is a tough world, and if you don't make it in the first 2 weeks, you're off to the sale rack, never to be seen again.
Yeah, I think you know, if you're going to release your content that you create, I mean, social media generally is a good petri dish to find out how people react. Okay. Because reactions inside social media tend to be immediate and without governor. Okay, sometimes that's good, sometimes not, right? So if you make something great, people gush over it. If you make something people hate, they got no problem giving you the beatdown. You know, in terms of J. Crew, I have to imagine, you know, that they get a lot of feedback, and it affects what they buy and what they produce going forward.
You bet it.
You know, because even if you know, looking at their followers, okay, if they were going to do consumer product testing, or consumer marketing testing, which you and I have both done, you do not use a sample size of 184,000 people. Okay, you use a sample size of maybe 20 people. Right? And so you attempt to extrapolate, you know, now, so any of you that know anything about statistics, right, the bigger the sample size, the more likely you are to actually model the population. Mm-hmm. You know, so they've got almost 60 boards, almost 4,600 pins, and 184,000 people interacting.
Well, just look at the pictures you've got on there. The girl right in the middle with the blue shirt with the right in the center, 111 pins. And then the sundress down below where it says beach wedding has 135 pins. You know, you can actually start scoring the garment based on how many repins it gets.
That's right. That's right.
So go, okay.
That's
so
right.
The sundress is slightly more popular than the blue top, you know, which again is slightly more popular than the one over there where it says spring summer with only 96 pins.
That's right. I mean, and you could actually say, okay, so you could go, all right, this was popular, this wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this was moderately popular. Okay, it's like maybe the baseline. Maybe you say something's got to get at least 30 pins to get made. Okay, so then you're looking at this, you're looking at this, you're looking at the other things. Okay, and yeah, it would be a way then to score what should you keep. Okay, and so you know, and this is true basically for any kind of social content, whether it's visual or otherwise, right? You have two choices. You can either make what you want or you can give people more cowbell. You know, I come back to that Saturday Night Live skit where Christopher Walken, you know, I got the fever and the only prescription is more cowbell, right? And they're making fun of blue oyster cults. Don't fear the Reaper. So you could decide, hey, if you're J. Crew, you know, you will get insight into consumer behavior so that you can start anticipating trend instead of chasing them. Okay, and then finally, of course, they made money. They had direct sales and indirect sales, both at the stores and at the, you know, in online, right?
I mean, the catalog that they put on Pinterest, you actually could buy the item right from there. That was a really nice integration that they did.
Yeah, and I think you're going to see more and more of that. I mean, ultimately, Pinterest, I mean, you know, it's funny. There's a guy that I'm going to try to have in our podcast, and it's called Manly Pinterest or something like that. Okay, and it's about how, you know, can men use Pinterest too, right? Or is it all basically weddings and, you know, dresses and things like that? Okay, but still for fashion, you know, Pinterest is like a custom built platform that is their dream. You know, and I think down the road, Pinterest is definitely going to focus more on how can they make money from taking essentially the direct sales. So, you know, there are some advantages to to creating your own content instead of curating it. Okay. When you're creating your content, you can form the customer's attitudes about brand. You can create what I call lust after what you do. Okay, if you spend the time, you know, I really believe that really good design can create desire. That's why people really lust after the iPhone and don't care so much about Samsung. Okay, and finally, you can really shape consumer identities on how to evaluate market goodness and badness. Okay, what's good, what's not, and again, that's all through how you present your visual concepts. And so I'm going to tell you this story about this vodka, Reka. Now, I'm not a super big vodka drinker, me personally. I'm with my daughter, and we go to this liquor store here in Minneapolis. It's a grocery store, actually. It's Byerly's. It's a high-end grocery store. And we needed to go to the liquor store in order to get some wine for the dinner and whatnot. And I did need to get some vodka. And so we're walking by, and my daughter goes, who's 11, okay, obviously never drank vodka, has no idea about the marketing, isn't exposed to any of it. She goes, hey, look at that one with the hat. And this is the hat. Okay, so talk about design lust. Talk about an image that captures your brand. What's your album cover? Okay. That's what's sitting up on the shelf. Reka vodka, little knit hat. So out of all the bottles that are up there, Grey Goose, Belvedere, which is what I actually like the most, okay, and others, you know, I mean, the bottle is interesting, but then it has this little hat. Okay, and that stopped my daughter, and it also stopped me in looking at what was on the shelf. Okay, so here's how imagery and design can affect the decision to purchase. Now, I actually did buy it, Okay. And then I started looking at the bottle. And it's got, I joke, I call this the Evian sales approach. It's made in the mountains by fairies and, it's all this good stuff. Okay, vodka is vodka. Okay. Vodka by law can really only be made one way. It has to be a starch-based mash that is distilled at least to a alcohol by volume of 40%. Okay. And it has to be odorless and colorless. Okay. So, of course, Reyka's vodka, Arctic Spring Water, Carter Head Still, which actually this is a particular type of fluted still, and it's most high-end vodkas are washed through carbon in one way or another to remove impurities. But also that the taste actually that you associate with high-end vodkas actually comes as a result of the carbon wash. And they make, this is a microbrew approach again. So I was like, okay, well, that's all interesting. They've got the Evian of vodkas. Okay, great. Now, it actually is pretty decent. I've actually started to like it. I would not think Iceland if I would think vodka. But this is pretty good. And it stopped me again because of this hat, right? There was something different. There was something unique. And the notion of, it's Iceland, it's cool, it's crisp. How can we embody that in one image? Well, the hat. And I don't know what these hats cost to put on the bottles. Even if it's $1 or so, I imagine it works. So then I went and started to look at, well, what kind of content do they produce? Well, this is from their site, and this is the Carter Head Still. Okay, this is social proof of their, story. All right. There's a lava rocks that they use. Okay, I don't know if the lava rocks do anything. I don't know if the lava rocks are any more efficient than if it was activated charcoal. As a matter of fact, it wouldn't surprise me to find out that lava rocks are essentially activated charcoal. Nevertheless, there are the lava rocks. Okay? And so they tell this story through their imagery. If you're, again, this is vodka. It is a commodity. You can't make it a different color and call it vodka. Okay? I mean, you can have vodka flavored drinks, all right, but you can't make it a different color and call it vodka. You can't make it from a different mash and call it vodka. There are strict requirements to be able to be called vodka, what you can do with it. Okay, now, my guess is, think about, we talked about Absolute at the beginning. Which one of these things is more fascinating to you? Absolute or what I've told you about Reyka? Okay, and this largely, again, is all because of their image and their design lust. Okay. Now here's some, then I went to look on Twitter and elsewhere about, well, what are people saying about this bottle? Okay. Now here's a bottle with style. Okay. Reyka vodka with a hat. So to recap, you can curate your content and grow your brand and your audience. You can create content and grow your brand and your audience. The value you need to provide is the good stuff that people want, whether you're creating it or you're curating it. And the value you can receive is their attention, their information, their money, and in the case of these guys, you can actually shape the market about what's good. Okay, and that concludes everything. We've got a few people on the line, and so we can take questions if there are any. Troy, do you have any concluding thoughts?
Well, you think about the hat, it's great for the design of it, but they also have just enough of a story. I mean, that's not a great story. It's 4 panels on a bottle, but it's enough to convince you that this vodka you've never heard of is good enough to drink, right? It's on a par with whatever you've been drinking. And so when you combine the two things of the unique sort of album cover image of the hat with an actual backstory, kind of like the Blue Bottle Coffee people in Oakland, you're like, okay, now you've got some real content to work with, and you can actually start building on that. And I think that's kind of where the visual, there's lots of people out there who can advise you on how to write blogs and do word content, but the visual content is really the hammer that drives the nail home.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And if you look too, right, I mean, all their visuals, here's the still. I mean, these are industrial photographs,
Yeah,
but they
they're not the
provide
best
social proof
photograph,
to the
but
story.
it tells a great story. It's a, you know, that still looks like it's 30 feet high. I mean, you don't have to have a still that big, but it's cool. It looks like a giant bomb.
It does, right? Well, that's the nature
But,
of the Carter head still.
so, you know, combine that with the hat and the charcoal, and you got a story. That's not that hard, really, when you think about it. You just have to be willing to do it.
Well, and that's the notion of focus, right? You know, and one of the things imagery can do, you know, looking at Reka, the brands often try to sell on the basis of feature. It goes beep, it's yellow, it's this, it's that, right? And to a certain extent, they're trying to do that here. You know, Arctic spring water. Well, what's the implication? Everybody else's is like what? Fresh toilet water? You know,
that's the same as the beer guy saying that artesian water from artesian wells or cold filtered from the Rocky Mountains.
That's right. That's right. And as someone who did beer ads for what, 20 years, I mean, you definitely know, you know. Okay.
And then, you know, your lava rock filtration is the same as beechwood aging.
Right.
You know, it's the same as you know, double brewed or frost brewed or all the things they say today.
Right.
You know, it's a way to make a story for a commodity product.
But it gives you then, I mean, in the case of the visuals, though, the visuals provide the social proof. Here it is. It's real.
Yeah.
You know, it's not made by fairies in the middle of nowhere. It's actually industrially made, you know, and here you are.
Well, if you go back to beechwood aging, people think the beer is stored in beechwood, you know, barrels. It's like, no, it's a bark chip thrown into a giant 50 million gallon steel tank. It's not real. It's not really stored in beechwood casks.
You're destroying, though, the visual, right? You know, but
well,
I don't know if you'd want to photograph that. Yeah, but you know, I think you know, you're right in terms of it provides enough of a story to sell it. And I will tell you, it's actually it's a very good product. I mean, I am a vodka drinker. I primarily like Belvedere, but Reka is plenty fine. Would have never have bought it absent the hat. You know, so yeah, so there you are, right? Wouldn't have even given it a second look. And liquor stores are, again, a case of massive amounts of content, zero freaking attention.
Well, one of these days we should do one of these seminars on wine bottle labels just to, like, concentrate on, you know, really? Just the labels alone.
Oh, definitely. Well, that's your album cover for the bottle, right? It's the promise of what's inside.
Just deciphering what that label means from a visual standpoint is, you know, that's a science in and of itself.
Well, I come to it's the promise of what's inside. I mean, I know that maybe we can get Bryan Wansink to do one of these with us. He runs this place called the Spice Box. I think it's at the University of Michigan. And they look at how does presentment change people's attitudes towards food. And they will take crappy wine, put it in amazing bottles, tell them, you know, it was by fairies or whatever in California, and people are like, oh my God, this is the best wine I've ever had, right? And then they'll talk to, you know, they'll take, you know, Chateau Le Pape, put it in a crappy bottle, say it was made in Iowa, and people are like, oh my God, this is the worst wine I've ever had. Okay, you know, so it's the expectation of the experience.
With my own two eyes, I saw a guy in a beer taste test think 7-Up was beer. I saw that with my own two eyes. That's not an urban legend.
Well, Zebo was pretty close to 7-Up, and that was beer, right?
I don't know what that was.
All right, here, hold on. Let me just see a question here. 1 second. When creating imagery, what colors are trending as the most eye-catching? For a while it seemed like it was blue, and then I've heard yellow. What's the standard now, and does any of that idea hold any merit? I think I'll let Troy, the artist, answer that one.
It depends on the category, really, of what you're, you know, when it comes to food and things like that, it's always red and orange and yellow. B2B is always blue because men's favorite color is blue. And when you're in a male-dominated world of B2B, usually it's always, every logo is always 300 PMS blue. The trick is finding a way to combine the standard colors with the trending colors. And there's lots of, you know, color charts that you can refer to. They have them online everywhere where you can say, you can type in a color and it'll tell you what colors go well with this color, so that you can add a color to the story without having to tell the client, hey, you need to change, you know, all your trucks and all your signs and from 300 PMS blue to, you know, 298. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. I have to say it really depends on the category, though, as to what is trending and what is not. Of course, fashion is, you know, as Oscar Levant said, it's a form of ugliness so terrible it has to be changed every 6 months. So, you know, it's all about what industry you're in. So it's really easy, though, now today to Google the color matching systems and to come up with a color story and a palette for your brand. And that not only includes the color you're stuck with, you know, the logo that's been around for 50 years, and be able to modernize it and come up with a new look, so that, you know, when I worked on Carnival, they had this red, white, and blue logo, and it was horrible. And there's just nothing you can do with it. You know, so we just tried to make it as small as possible and to just not use it as much as we could, because it was just a bad logo. And they were stuck with it, and there was nothing we could do to get them off it. Whereas Sunglass Hut, you know, they were perfectly willing to, you know, they didn't even have a corporate color. You know, they had an orange for a while that they were kind of into, but even that went away. So, you know, some people are really married to their colors, and some people are willing to, you know, go with the flow and go with trend.
Well, one of the things too, a resource that we can put in as part of this seminar, Pantone has a palette selector. So if you can find the color you're using, then they have groupings that they think are complementary and contrary colors. Mm-hmm. And so we'll put their URL up there, but it's Pantone.com, and that's when Troy's talking 300 this or, you know, 290. Those are colors in the Pantone wheel. They're labeled by number. You know, and obviously for some brands, colors are so important. I mean, the shade of blue used by Tiffany is made by Pantone, and only Tiffany, it's actually a registered mark. No one else can use that color.
Nice.
You know, so if you attempt to decide to use Tiffany's light baby bluish color with that Pantone designator, you're going to be in violation of their mark. So anyway, I'll put that as part of the resources. So one of the questions that came out essentially was, you know, it's a creative question, okay, and it's essentially, you know, how do you get your ideas? You know, how do you know? You know, how do you know how to compose that album cover shot? Mm-hmm. I have some thoughts on that, but I'll let Troy give his thoughts first.
Well, creativity is the ability to connect the seemingly unconnected. Now that applies not only to just art and music, but it applies to business, all kinds of things, medicine, engineering, whatever your case may be. So that's creativity in and of itself. A lot of times it comes down to what you can sell to other people. So you may have an idea that makes perfect sense to you, but you can't convince anyone else that it makes sense, namely the client or, you know, your boss, whoever. And being able to apply rational thought to irrational or to an emotional feeling is a skill that you have to learn so that you can actually get your way. And, you know, getting an idea, it's kind of like you have to exercise the muscle. It's just like anything else. I spend my whole day, you know, working on projects for people, and so I have a fairly deep drawer of reference material in my brain, and I have a fairly well-exercised muscle and muscle memory. And I think that helps. I know I get rusty from time to time, and they don't come as fast or as easy or as good. But I think getting an idea is really just looking for the truth and looking for the insight that, you know, people give you these briefs that are 8 pages long, and, you know, you're supposed to, you know, find some sort of out-of-the-box idea based on their all these instructions, you're like, well, the box is so small, you know, there's only one answer. A strategy or a brief should be a springboard, not a constraint. The strategy should be so simple that there's 10 answers that would be possible. But when the strategy gets complicated, then there's usually one or no answer to that problem because there's too many parameters put on it. So the key is to get a better brief, really, and you'll have more ideas based off of simple briefs than bad briefs that are complicated.
The thought that I have, it seizes on where Troy talks about muscle memory. I think one of the challenges, you know, when the question is asked, well, how do you do that, right? And that's essentially what's being asked here. You know, how do you make a Kiss album so I can go copy it, right? Mm-hmm. You know, I've spent a lot of time around artists. I can communicate to artists, but I draw like the worst. People laugh at me, my illustrations, okay, because they're so bad. But what I have that I think is lacking, especially in the digital realm, is an understanding of literature, art, and history, none of which has anything to do with technology. Okay? So if you look at great images online, okay, they're great images because they anchor in meaningful ways into cultural thoughts and desires. And to do that, you got to be educated. You have to know about art and history and motivations and emotions, you know. And so a lot of what we do at the studio is focused on cinematography and art and all these other things. Not because the technology isn't important. It is, okay? You need to be able to understand how the technology works. But art is not a cookie cutter replicable. It's not SEO, okay? It's not like, oh, I do this and I do this and I do this and boom, you know, my page is fine, okay? To be creative, you have to be able to see connections between disparate things, as Troy talked about, and to be able to do that, you know, he talked about having, you know, a big bag to go through. You know, when I interviewed George Lois, one of the things he said is you know, and understand the guy's in his 80s. I read the New York Times every morning, and I go to the Museum of Modern Art every Sunday. You know, and that was his way of continuing to fill his bag with ideas about what's going on in society and how have people tried to communicate that. All right, so
well, you know, that's interesting, Brian, because, you know, my first job, my creative director, you know, I was a hick from Cincinnati, didn't know anything, and just gotten out of art school, had no real life experience, and my boss sat me down and said, you have no real life experience, you don't know anything, and here's what I'm going to do. You go to any museum, any movie, anything you want, I'll pay for it. And because I need you to get some life experience as quick as possible so you'll be more valuable to me. He said, you have lots of talent. You can draw. You can do all those things. He said, but you don't have a drawer to draw from. You have nothing. You have no files in your head. So he paid for all that. And it was a great help to me because I was able to just jam my head full of all kinds of things that I didn't know before and references that then I could then regurgitate in new ways and produce work that actually connected with people. And I think there's not enough of that these days where, you know, they're so busy billing hours at the ad agencies that they don't give people time to go to the museum at lunch. You need to go to the museum at lunchtime to get inspired. And
that sounds silly, right? That you know, how do we make good imagery? Well, go out and study a bunch of it. I mean, essentially is my answer. Okay? Because after a while, even subconsciously, you'll pick up.
Right.
Why is this good?
You make subconscious connections that, you know, are new ways of interpreting things that have been around forever.
Yeah. So, and that's why I can't draw at all, but I have enough of a bag to explain to artists, this is what I'm kind of looking for. Oh, okay, you know. You know, and so yeah, I can't draw at all, but I can communicate with enough artists to be able to tell them this is the type of effect I want to see happen, right?
But that's the thing where you have to have that reference material to be able to draw from, and if you've only ever studied, you know, Flash animation, well, you're not ready yet to do ideas. You need to have ideas. You need to go practice having ideas and stop programming for a minute.
That is the key, right? So, and the final thing I'll leave us with is you can copy an idea, but don't copy the content. Okay. So, in terms of saying, how do you come up with these ideas and how can I make something fabulous like that? Okay. Imitation is a form of flattery. It does not work to build content that builds an audience or to sell product. Okay. And this is a mistake that I see done, all the time and I'll try to put a link to this stuff. Mountain Dew. Okay, so Bohemian Rhapsody, since we're on the music theme, Bohemian Rhapsody is one of the most famous songs in rock, right, by Queen. And Mountain Dew did a parody, or almost a direct imitation, of the video from Bohemian Rhapsody, okay? And, here's Mountain Dew. They got all this money. I'm sure the commercial cost $500,000. I'm sure they backed it with 200 to 300 million of airplay. And you have no memory of it. Okay, despite all that. Then take, is actually done here by an agency in town, Fallon. It was the Cosmopolitan Hotel, and I'll put the link on this. And they did Bohemian Rhapsody. Yeah, but right. The people sung it as an opera. Mm-hmm. And they acted out within a context of an opera, but it was in a modern setting. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so there's a concept where we took the concept and we applied it, but we didn't just replicate it. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so again, if you have these, this bag to draw on, you can look at something and go, hey, that works. Maybe it works in this place. But you can't just duplicate. I mean, all the things I've shown you here today, all the things that Troy's shown you here today is, again, designed to help fill that bag, but it's not successful to just go out and copy. It's not going to work. Okay, for whatever reason, that type of direct copying just doesn't penetrate people's minds. And given the fact that it's such a scarcity, attention scarce world, you will not get ahead having mediocre content that just doesn't penetrate. Well, with that, we've definitely, we're coming up here on our hour and a half. I want to thank everyone who attended today. This will be available via replay. It'll take about a day or so to produce it all, and you will get an email from us saying when it's available. And if you're watching this on replay, if you have questions or whatnot, you of course can email us at editor, EDITOR, at brandmediastudio.com. Hope we'll see you at the Brand Media Studio in the future. And with that, have a great afternoon. Until next time, friends, onward to victory.
Bye.